We are today at the Spirit of 76 Museum at 201 North Main Street in Wellington, Ohio, and Becky Norton is going to take us on a little tour of the museum. Hi,
yes.
Becky.
Hi, I'm so glad to meet you.
Likewise, glad to meet you.
I'm glad to be on your blog. So this building, if anybody would like to know, this building was built in about the 1870s. It became a museum. It was a cheese warehouse at the time. Cheese was a big thing about the 70s to about 1900 because farmers had all of this milk and they couldn't ship it. So they turned it into cheese. And I was telling you about Mr. Warner, and he and another gentleman, Mr. Hoare, got together and had the Hoare-Warner Cheese Company. And they would export about 60,000 pounds of cheese a year.
That's a lot of cheese.
Very a lot of cheese, but that's a whole nother story. I think we want to talk a little bit about Archibald Willard and his paintings today. Come in and we'll look at our display.
Okay.
We have here on this first floor, we have made it into an art gallery. It's a sort of an accidental happenstance, but we're very glad to do it. We call our exhibit Yours Truly, A.M. Willard, because Mr. Willard signed many of his things that way. And so we thought it was appropriate that we do that. And this board is all about Mr. Willard, and we have some of his portraits here and some news articles about him. But I think the more interesting things besides Willard are his paintings and the history of him and Wellington. And I was sharing with you before that a lot of the people that were his models were Wellington people, and he got a lot of his ideas from the people in Wellington. This is one of my favorite ones. This is called Off to War, about the Civil War soldier saying goodbye to his sweetheart. And Willard was in the Civil War too, and made many sketches and sent them back home, and then they were copied and sold to families of Civil War soldiers. Anyway, they came up with this idea for the Spirit of 76 painting, and Willard started it here. And of course he had local people pose for it. And he had pictures that he would paint from and do that. Well, Ryder wanted him to come into Cleveland and to do his painting in Cleveland because he wanted to get a lot of interest in it. Because after the centennial, of course, he was planning on selling copies of this painting. And he wanted to gauge kind of the popularity of it. People loved it. They crowded around. It was just like in the old days when people would stand and watch a TV show in the hardware window. The same kind of entertainment. Willard painted his father's head on the body that he already had painting because his father was ill at the time, and he did this as a tribute to his father. But anyway, I digress. This is an original Spirit of 76. All of these are originals that we have here. And the fifer was a man by the name of Hugh Mosier, and he was like 6 feet 6 inches tall. Very tall gentleman. I live just down the road from where his farm is, and where his family grew up. And then, of course, we talked about the central figure, and then the young boy was Henry Devereaux, who was in a military academy in Cleveland. And his father had been in the Civil War. He had been, I think, a colonel, and he was also very wealthy from the railroads. So when the centennial was over, of course it was immensely popular, as we know. It was immensely popular. It went on a world tour, and when the painting got back, Mr. Devereaux bought the painting, and it now is in Marblehead, Massachusetts. Our board member, Scott Markel, has seen the one in Marblehead, and he said it's just like they're marching right at you. It's just a phenomenal painting to see in person. These two are named Pluck 1 and Pluck 2. And the story behind these are Willard worked for the Tripp Carriage Factory doing pinstriping and paintings on carriages, and he was so good at it they won all kinds of prizes at the state fair, which of course got their name out, and then people would want to come to the Tripp Carriage Factory and buy their decorated carriages because they had won the blue ribbon at the fair, the state fair. And so little Addie Tripp came to Mr. Willard, and she had a page cut out of a magazine, and it was of a dog and a wagon, I think. And she says, "Oh, Mr. Tripp, won't you, or oh, Mr. Willard, won't you please do a painting for me?" And she told him what she wanted in this painting, and he said, "Okay." So he came up with this first painting here. And this was taken to Mr. Ryder in Cleveland to be framed, and he put it in his window. And people kept coming in and saying, "What happened? What happened? What happened?" So he convinced Mr. Willard to paint a second one to tell what happened. And so then you see the second one where the dog gets the rabbit. One of the children runs back to Mama. I feel sorry for this girl, because I think she probably got her head really bashed. But that was, and these are two paintings that they made into chromolithographs. The trouble with the chromolithographs, and you'll see some that we have, is that they age, and you would think you could take them to an art conservancy and have them cleaned like we do our regular paintings, but you can't do that with the chromolithographs because of the paper and the way they're made, that you can't take that varnish off of them like you can a painting. So you just have to, because we have a couple and people will say, "Why don't you get them cleaned?" I said, "It's a chromolithograph, you can't." Well, this is our prize right now. We're so excited about this. We have, these are Masonic teaching banners that Willard painted for Bellefontaine Masons about the same time he was working on the Spirit of 76 painting. There is a series of three, or there are a series of three. We have all three of them. Scott Markel, that I mentioned before, is a Mason. He discovered that they were in the basement of the Springfield Masonic headquarters, and it took him quite a while, but he finally got them to donate it to our Masonic Lodge, who in turn donated them to us. We have had this one cleaned and stabilized. We have not had it restored. And the difference is you can still see the wrinkles in it, all those kinds of things. We did not want to have any more painting put on it. We just wanted it stabilized so that we could have it here at the museum and display it. We chose this one to have stabilized first because it has Willard's name in the corner. And of the three, this was the only one that he signed. And this is the workers, the stonemasons, and they're building King Solomon's temple. His paintings got better, I think. If you look at some of them, this is a painting of Dan Patch, which was a famous racehorse in the time that it was painted, harness racer. And you can see how it kind of sort of primitive. But then you look at this, and this is a watercolor, and this is actually Mr. Willard. He liked to paint himself in a lot of his paintings, and I think this is so different. He did go to art school for a year in New York and studied, and I think a lot of, you can almost tell the before and after paintings just from the looks of them. He did a lot of landscapes. He traveled out west at one time, did a lot of western landscapes. I tend to like I like his watercolors a lot. This is the one he did when he was in art school. It's called The Roman Prisoner. And you can see how fine it is with the muscle showing and the wrinkles and the cloth, and far different from some of his early paintings that he did.
And if you're back at a distance, you can't see the chains, but
yes,
you come a little closer.
Yeah, there's chains, and it goes down here, and the links. He did a very nice job with those. This is a very, very early pluck that it almost looks like as something that Willard did on his sketch pad. And a great, I want to say nephew of his, Willard Gordon, came to see us one time, and he says, "Oh, you need to have a pluck," because it was before we had the other plucks there, and so he sent it to us. We were we were very thrilled that he was so generous, and he also sent the portraits of Willard's mom and dad. And on your right, you will see a wonderful portrait of Hugh Mosier, which looks like a photograph, but it's actually a pencil sketch.
It does look like a photograph from the period.
And here's a photograph of him, and then this is it's This is my grandfather, great-grandfather, and it was his father that posed for the central figure. But they were part of the Fife and Drum Corps, and they were good buddies. And these are a lot of portraits of famous Wellington people or people that had an impact. This gentleman, Mr. Wadsworth, was a funeral director, and he was also part of a slave rescue here in Wellington.
Oh, really? There are Wadsworths in Connecticut, and I'll just about bet you that they're somehow related.
Probably. I would think so. A lot of people from Wellington, if you go back, came from the New England area. This house, we call it the Houck House, and he was one of the first settlers of Wellington, and this house still exists today, and it looks pretty much like that. And Willard painted scenes underneath the windows, and they still exist.
How about that?
Yeah, after all the people that have been through it and remodeled it and whatnot, but I think that's neat that they kind of tried to leave it as much as they could. We have Mr. Robinson, who had the barbershop here in town, and it is still a barbershop today. It's gone through a few owners, but it still is in existence today, which I think is pretty cool. And Chief Firkren, he has since passed away, but he was a very, very nice gentleman. Really fine man. And Mrs. Rucker, she was a home ec teacher here in town.
So there's more here in Spirit of 76 Museum than just Archibald Willard.
Oh yes, just you wait. And Miss Edith Robinson, I'll tell you about Mr. Herrick, but he donated the money for the library, and she became the librarian and was one of the longest serving librarians that we've had here in Wellington.
Wow.
Very cool.
And Joseph was a relative of hers?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
He was a Civil War soldier, and we had found out that they were in Kentucky, and he was killed. He was shot because of his color.
Oh, no.
Made it through the Civil War. Actually, and I have to look into this more, he was in the same, he was in the 103rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Company F, and so was my great-grandfather. And so it must have been a desegregated unit, and they were in Kentucky, and he made it through some of the war and then was killed because of racism. Okay, after you. And now we're getting into our kind of military section. This is Colonel McDermott, who lived kind of across the street from Mr. Warner. I mean, after Mr. Warner, but that's where his house was. And he was the highest ranking soldier from Lorain County in World War I. And he was like an aide to Pershing, and Pershing had him when he signed the treaty, when the war was over. Really sad. So we have pieces from Civil War. We have a collection of hunting guns, and we have some other weapons here, and we have them all cataloged so that, because I don't know them all. But everything in the museum has been donated to us. We don't go out and buy things. They have meaning to everyone. So we'll have people that'll come in and say, my mother donated thus and so, do you know where it is? And sometimes I do. Believe it or not, sometimes I do, which is way cool. And I was telling you about Chief Firkren, and there he is in his jumpsuit. Come this way.
Okay.
This is the John Price, who was in Oberlin, and his former master sent a slave catcher to come get him. He was duped and captured and brought to Wellington because they were going to catch a train, but the slave catcher wasn't that smart, because I think the train wasn't going to come for something like 4 or 5 hours. When they got to Wellington, everybody was out because there had been a fire, and they figured out what was going on. Plus, all these people were coming from Oberlin because they figured out what was going on. So there was a place called the American House, and they were up here in kind of an attic room up in the American House, and they were trying to figure out a way to get John Price, and the slave catcher had his gun. To make a long story short, John Price was rescued, whisked away, and on his way to Canada. Nobody knows what happened to him afterwards. But this is the building that Herrick came in and said, take this building down and put the library there.
Okay.
So that's why this building doesn't exist anymore. If you remember when I was telling you about the funeral director downstairs, this is Mr. Wadsworth right here. These are men that were thrown into jail because, of course, of the Dred Scott decision. Anybody who helped a fugitive slave was a felon, for lack of a better word. They were taken into Cleveland, they were held. The people in Ohio thought that they were heroes. They sent them cakes, they sent them letters, they sent them money. The judge finally said, if you pay $1 a piece, I will let you out. They wouldn't do it. Finally they were released because it was such a hubbub. Because I don't think the judges in Cleveland thought that it was going to create this much of a stir. But all of Ohio thought these men were heroes. And this is King Solomon's Temple. And
Holy
this
cow,
is the
look at that.
the next thing that we want to get stabilized. Isn't it beautiful? This one's my favorite because I love the detail on the temple. Or the palace, I guess. I always call it the temple, but it's the palace.
Now I have a dumb question.
Yeah.
Does any portion of this structure continue to exist? Or is...
I don't think so. I don't know. And then we have, like I said, this is, and here you go. You can take a picture of this if you like, because this shows what the third one is, which is actually the first one. It's, they're cutting the wood. To get ready for the building. But that's the third mural, which is actually the first one in the series. Okay, that's Dr. John's, and he is the one that got the railroad to come through Wellington.
Okay.
And he did it by saying he would give his land for the right-of-way. It was going to go into another little town nearby us, and he encouraged them to come to Wellington, which is what made Wellington grow. But the thing that he did was, he said, I will give you the land for the right-of-way, but every passenger train has to stop in Wellington, let the passengers off, which means that they would have to go and buy food, buy whatever in the stores, and then he would sit on his porch, and if a train went through, he called up the train, I don't know what it was, wherever they originated from, and they would signal to the train engineer, and they would have to back up and stop and then go on with their trips. It was pretty funny. He was a wise man.
There's only one other question I want to
Okay.
ask.
Sure.
You're open Saturday and Sunday?
Through October.
Through October.
Yes, April through October.
Okay.
So this will be the end, although if we are called, the secretary usually will get one of us to come and we can give private tours.
All right, and how do people contact you?
You can get on it. We have a Facebook page,
Okay.
Spriit of 76, or you can just Google Spriit of 76 Museum, Wellington, Ohio, and it has our information.
Okay, great.
Telephone number
Great.
and all that sort of
Now, is there a
things.
fee to come through the museum?
No.
No fees?
You're more than welcome to donate whatever you want to donate, but no,
Okay.
no fee. And this is, I call it like our farming and home goods. We have all kinds of tools and things here. As you can see, this is also, besides having the second mural stabilized, we want to get this area redone. All of these arrowheads were found by Alex Justice. All of the Civil War bullets we have, Alex Justice walked to Gettysburg and picked
Wow.
up things. It was before it was illegal to do that. These are some carvings that he made on his trees that were found on his property and brought to the museum. All of these axes, he was a blacksmith. He made like toys and things that he traded for. Are you truly amazed by all of these wonderful treasures? This is our tribute. This needs to be cleaned up, but this is our tribute to the cheese making that went on in Wellington and the dairy industry.
Did they have a specialty cheese?
You know, we have never been able to find out. I think it was just a generic kind of yellow-white cheese that was known as a farmer's cheese.
Farmer's cheese, okay.
And when we talk about cheese factories, it's not like we think of today as a huge cheese factory. It was in the guy's barn. They would milk the cow and then they would take it to the shed next door and they would pasteurize it, separate it, and turn it into cheese. It wasn't like it was a huge big building. And I don't know what happened to it. I had a picture of what one of the cheese factories looked like. It was just like a farm. Okay, I don't know if you can zoom in on it or not. But that top picture, that's a cheese factory. And you can see it's just a shed off of the guy's barn. And this I call the home goods section. And I love this area. We have a section that shows some of the old medicines that were available to people, toys. This is a little bit newer toy, and a lot of people come in and say, "Oh, my grandma had one like that we used to play with all the time." We always have a trouble here at the museum. Do we have things from the 1800s, which is what I think of a museum, but younger people think of things from the 1970s or the 1960s, and that's ancient to them. And I'm thinking, no, I lived in those times. We have so many things. We have a lot of things that are in storage, which is typical of a museum. But we want the museum to be relevant to people. We want it to be things that they're interested in seeing. Of course, like I said, I'm interested in the really old things, but to the kids, the things I grew up with are really old. This is one of those machines that was in the shoe store. And you would try on your shoes, and then you would put your foot in there. It's an x-ray machine. And then your parents could look in here and see if you had enough room for your toes to move.
Oh, really?
Needless to say, it doesn't work, and we wouldn't let it work anyway. But my husband said he remembers running into the shoe store and wanting to see their feet, because you can see the skeleton of your feet, you can see your bones.
I never saw one of those.
Yeah. Well, this came from Wellington. And we have home goods here, things from a long time ago, and the different dresses. And this is a storage area that we have. People have been very generous to us with uniforms and wedding dresses and different things, which is nice. This is called a ribbon quilt because it was made with swatches of ribbon.
And you said that's a ribbon quilt?
Ribbon quilt. See how these are ribbons?
I see.
This is a tied quilt that they piece together the top, and then you stitch the top to the bottom with these little threads. And a lot of crocheted things and doilies, and so there you have it. That's our museum on their spinning wheels.
All right, I guess that's going to conclude our little tour today.
It is.
All
I'm
right.
afraid we got to close up shop.
All right, well, Becky Norton, thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to conclude with?
If you'd like to see us, come to Wellington, Ohio. We'd be glad to show you through.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're
and
welcome.
I appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
to see us too.
It's been a real pleasure.
Good.
It has.
Good. All right. Thank you.